الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره. Undoubtedly, our praise and gratitude belong to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His help, and we seek His forgiveness. ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. Whomsoever Allah guides, there is none that can misguide, and whomsoever He sends astray, there is none that can guide. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. And I testify that there is no God, there's no deity, there's no one at all to whom worship is directed to, in truth, deserving of that worship, except Allah alone. And I testify that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the servant and the messenger of Allah. وصفيه من خلقه وخليله أدى الأمانة وبلغ الرسالة ونصح للأمة فكشف الله به الأمة وتركنا على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك فصلوات الله وسلامه عليه. And I testify that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the pure one chosen by Allah and the intimate friend of Allah and the one endowed with the enormous responsibility of conveying the religion of Allah. And by His grace, He fulfilled that responsibility bestowed upon Him. And He left all of us upon a pure path, a path which its night is like its day. None deviate from this path except that they ruin themselves. So we invoke Allah to send His peace and His blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad, his family and companions, and whomsoever follows his way until the end of time. Allah has said, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. O you who have believed, have taqwa of Allah, have fear, consciousness, awareness of Allah, and don't you dare die except in a state of Islam. يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمْ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. O humanity, have consciousness of your master who created you from a single soul. And from that soul created his wife. And from both of them brought forth many men and women. And have consciousness of Allah, in whose name you mutually demand rights from one another. And be conscious of the ties of kinship, and know that Allah has been ever watchful over all of you. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. O you who have believed, be conscious of Allah and speak truthfully. Because if you do so, He will rectify for you your affairs. He will forgive you your sins. And whosoever obeys Allah and His Messenger will have succeeded a great success. أما بعد فإن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة. As for what follows, then know that the worst of speech, and know that the best of speech is the book of Allah, and that the best of guidance is the guidance of Muhammad, and that the worst of matters in the religion are those that are newly introduced to it, as they undermine that which already exists. And every newly introduced matter to the religion is a heresy. Every heresy is a misguidance. Brothers and sisters, there's a very common phenomenon that I think all of us experience more and more nowadays, especially in the world of YouTube, the world of social media, your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Instagram, your WhatsApp. And it is this feeling of constantly needing a rush of inspiration. It is this constant desire for stimulation, for this spiritual stimulation that happens in a very cheap form. So what happens is you seek these posts that mention an ayah here or there, or the kinds of quotes that are meant to inspire people, or the kinds of forwards that we send in the morning about very interesting ahadith or very interesting ayat. And the purpose of these things is to kind of create a rush of iman, to create that stimulation of iman. And there is nothing wrong necessarily with seeking out opportunities to increase your iman. There's nothing wrong with seeking out those sources of inspiration that give you, that rush of emotion, that remind you in a way where you feel especially close to Allah. But the problem I want to highlight, brothers and sisters, is when we develop almost an addiction for this kind of inspiration, such that when those quotes of inspiration are not there, when those forwards are not there, when you're not being forwarded the YouTube video that mentions this interesting fact about Islam you've never heard before, when there's a hadith that you don't feel particularly inspired by their sermon on that day, when those things are absent, it feels as though I have no basis upon which to ground my faith. Because what I did was I built it on something very fleeting. I built it on something very cheap, something that is not robust, that when you go through calamity, you seek out these sources of inspiration. But these things are not strong enough to form a deep foundation of faith. And having a deep foundation of faith, brothers and sisters, is really at the heart of the matter. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, أَفَمَنْ أَسَّسَ بُنْيَانَهُ عَلَى تَقْوَى مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرِضْوَانٍ خَيْرٌ أَمَّنْ أَسَّسَ بُنْيَانَهُ عَلَى شَفَا جُرُفٍ هَارٍ فَانْهَارَ بِهِ فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ. Allah Azza wa Jalla is asking you to consider two types of people that are building. They're building a foundation. And the foundation of the first person is it is built upon taqwa from Allah. It is built upon a connection, a deep connection with Allah Azza wa Jalla, a deep relationship with Allah, and to seek the pleasure of Allah. Something that is more than coming and going like this. Something that is deep, that is robust, that is immune on some level to the ups and downs of life. If we are the type of people that we worship Allah as if though we are on an edge, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. From amongst the people are those that worship Allah on an edge. There's no stability, on an edge. When something good happens to them, they're over the moon, they're so excited. But the moment something difficult happens, there's no foundation beneath their feet. So Allah mentions the second scenario, or is it, think about the person who builds a foundation upon a bank that is already falling down. And imagine you're building on the shore and it's already leaning over and it falls over. And this foundation falls over to the fire of hell. If there is no deep foundation upon which we build our iman, more than just seeking those moments of inspiration, those quotes that come through Instagram or chapter titles, the kinds of things that you mount on the wall, if those are the only sources of inspiration that we have in our lives, then when difficulty comes, when doubts come, these things are not strong enough to carry us the distance. And what we mean to say here, brothers and sisters, is not that we must have this high level of euphoria and iman that exists all the time. And we know this from the story of Hanbala, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who noticed in himself something that really disturbed him. It shook his foundation. He used to be with the Prophet ﷺ, and he was reflecting upon the fact that when he sat in the company of the Prophet and in the company of the companions, he would think to himself, it is as though I see heaven and hell in front of me. It is as if I would die right now and I would feel so comfortable, inshallah, about my path because of the certainty I feel in that moment when I'm in that environment that fosters faith, that environment of faith. But I come home and I leave that environment in which I find inspiration, and he says, it feels as though I don't have iman. So he thought to himself, this must only be because of hypocrisy. This must only be that I'm actually a hypocrite and I don't actually have to. So he speaks to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and Abu Bakr says, I feel that too. So let us go to the Prophet and inform him, ask of him that we have this concern now. Is there really a deep problem with our faith that we feel it at this level up here when we are in your company? It is as though we see heaven and hell between our eyes. But the moment we go to our families, it all goes away. And the Prophet he redefined the paradigm. He reset the standards that they should have. When it comes to spirituality, it is about having a sustained level of faith. Not necessarily the sustained level of euphoria and iman high that you might experience in the 27th night of Ramadan. That's not what it means to be a believer, through thick and thin. The Prophet ﷺ, he told them that if you were able to retain the same level of faith in my company as you do when you mingle with the people, when you go back to your families, the angels would have stopped and shook your hands in your beds and while you walk through the streets. So he clarified for them that is not the expectation, that you retain that level of iman. And then he gave him some advice. O Hanbala, sa'a wa sa'a. That there be some time that you dedicate for these kinds of things, for your spirituality, for the cultivation of your faith. But there will also be some other time that you have your other responsibilities, you have your other duties. So what I want us to understand is that if the only thing that we build our faith upon is this idea that I must retain this rush of iman all the time, and the moment you don't get it, Shaitan tells you, what's the point? Why pray? Why go to these halaqas? The moment you leave, why go to these conferences? It's like a rush of iman, and then you go home, and then what happens? The problem, brothers and sisters, is that we have inspiration without implementation. We constantly seek inspiration, but we do not have the same level of dedication to applying it everywhere. And so what happens is the threshold to stimulate our hearts gets even higher and higher. When a comedian tells a joke, the first time he says it, maybe the whole folks in the room will laugh. The comedian tells the same joke immediately right after, far less people will laugh. He tells it a third time, maybe no one will laugh after that. If you treat your faith and you treat the religion that you learn as if it's this, box of novelties, box of new things, and the only things that excite your heart are these new things that you're exposed to, there's a problem. Because fundamentally, this message, Allah Azza wa Jalla refers to it as a reminder. And a reminder, by virtue of being a reminder, is what you already know. So to be able to draw inspiration from what you already know, to not look at iman and religion and faith as though it's this box of secrets, and only when something that is new that comes to you, that's mentioned on the minbar or in a halaqah or a dance or whatever it is, only when something new is mentioned, you say like, finally, like this is Iman right here. So we must build within ourselves or we must strengthen ourselves in a way that we do not become overly dependent on these rushes of inspiration without acting upon them. Because what it does is it really hardens our heart in the long run if we do not act upon the inspiration when it comes. The Prophet ﷺ, he gives us advice. He says, بادروا بالأعمال فتن. Says, race, have this propensity, بالأعمال, have this desire to act as much as possible, because what you are racing with is trials and tribulations that come your way. بادروا بالأعمال فتن. That race to accomplish big deeds as much as possible before trials and tribulations come your way. And no ordinary trials and tribulations. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, trials that come like the darkness of the night, that overwhelm you. You know, they used to say in the past that trials and tribulations used to be confined to a certain time. You know, there was that age of difficulty, but we went through it, we lived through it, and you thought, in the same way that maybe you think of a pandemic. It had its time, and then maybe we overcome it, and so on. That was the nature of how people viewed trials and tribulations. And one of the Sahaba, I believe it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he said, كيف بكم إذا ألبستم فتنة? How will you be when trials and tribulations no longer have a starting point and an end point that you recognize? يشيب فيه الكبير. That يشيب فيه الصغير. That the young person becomes gray, and this fitna is still continuing. The trials and tribulations are still continuing. ويهرم فيه الكبير. That the old person reaches the age of senility, and it's still, these trials and tribulations have reached no end. How will you be when that time comes? When it seems like there's no end to the fitna that comes your way, there's no end to the trials and tribulations that test your faith. The Prophet ﷺ, in the same hadith, he says, يُصْبِحُ الرَّجُلُ فِيهَا مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا. He says, a person will wake up in the morning as a believer and go to sleep as a disbeliever. أو يمسي مؤمنا ويصبح كافرا. Or he will go to sleep in the evening as a believer, but by the time he wakes up, he's a disbeliever. Because of the volatility of faith. There's no consistency in the faith when trials and tribulations come your way. يَبِيعُ دِينَهُ بِعَرَضٍ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. A person sells his religion with something fleeting from this world. And everything in this world, brothers and sisters, is fleeting. It does not last. The importance of being quick to implement what you know, it almost gives you a light in the time of darkness. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, when the trials and tribulations come, it will be as though the night has ceased upon you. Now, if you are familiar with the road, and you drive in this road constantly, and one of the street lights goes out, you say, I don't know which turn to take any longer. Say, I'm familiar with this road. I know the path. I can't recognize the landmarks as well, but I recognize the path somehow. But if this road is completely unknown to you, and the lights have already gone out, and the trials and tribulations have already poured upon you, do you know which way to turn? So the Prophet ﷺ is guiding us to the fact that if you are quick to action now, then when the night becomes dark, and when many people don't have clarity, inshallah, you will retain some sense of clarity. You will retain some sense of guidance. And the other meaning to this as well is, when trials and tribulations come, then even when you are not able to act in the same way as you were able to before, you still get rewarded. Let's say you had wealth, but the trials and tribulations came and you had no wealth. But you used to be the kind of person that needed charity. When you no longer have your wealth, Allah Azza wa Jalla counts that for you as a good deed. Let's say you were someone who was healthy, was able to stand for a long time in the prayer, but that trial and tribulation comes and you feel tested. But because you used to stand in the prayer before and a trial has hit you, then Allah Azza wa Jalla will continue to write it for you as a fitna. But if there is no action that preceded that fitna, if there is no action that preceded before this calamity had befallen upon you, then what reward is there to capture after? There's only the regret. There's only the regret of that moment. So, brothers and sisters, what I advise all of us to do is that we try our best to build this propensity for action. The way that we overcome this dependence upon this dopamine rush of interesting posts and these rare quotes that come by here and there on Instagram posts or Twitter or whatever it may be. The way that we overcome this dependency is that we build action and habits in our life that keep us grounded throughout all of the calamity that we endure. And the most important actions that we establish in our life, brothers and sisters, are the obligations that Allah Azza wa Jalla has obligated upon us. مَنْ تَقَرَّبَ عَبْدِي إِلَيَّ بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, my servant does not draw nearer to me with anything I love more than that which I have obligated upon him. The things Allah Azza wa Jalla has made a requirement, the 5 daily prayers, the fasting of Ramadan. If you seek spirituality outside of these means, you will not reach it. It is these deeds that Allah loves so much that He obligated them. So if you're thinking to yourself, where do I start? You start at your obligation. Those things that Allah Azza wa Jalla has commanded you to do, and He gives you a structure to your life. If you are already fulfilling your obligations, then have some wird of Quran or some wird of dhikr that you do consistently. What that means is that there's a portion of the Quran or there's a portion of remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jalla that you do on a consistent basis. So that even though you might not have a rush of Iman at that moment, you still have that thing that's built into your schedule to remove you from the craziness of the day-to-day world and to try you closer to Allah, to remind you that this is what I'm really for. To build into our world this kind of level of consistency and this level of habit. And the Prophet ﷺ reminds us that there are some deeds that are so small, or you might think of them as small, but they are so heavy on the scales of Allah. كلمتان خفيفتان على اللسان حبيبتان إلى الرحمن ثقيلتان في الميزان سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that there are 2 words, 2 sentences. They are beloved to the most merciful. They are light on the tongue but heavy on the scales. What is it? Subhanallah wa bihamdihi. Subhanallah. Where you extol Allah Azza wa Jalla, you exalt Allah Azza wa Jalla. So you memorize a couple of sentences that you say regularly, and you just sit there and you remember Allah Azza wa Jalla. To build these kinds of things into our day, they create for us a foundation in which we do not become overly dependent upon this rush of dopamine that we're constantly seeking. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Indeed, all praise and gratitude belong to Allah. We praise Him, we thank Him, and we invoke Allah to send His peace and His blessing upon Prophet Muhammad, his family and companions, and whosoever follows his way until the end of time. Brothers, we spoke about the phenomenon of this addiction to inspiration culture, these quotes that come about. And the problem with this is not seeking opportunities for increasing our iman. The problem with it is creating a dependency in which, when these things become absent, it's as though we're struggling in the middle of the ocean and we have no lifeline to come back to Allah. The way that we overcome this is that we build in ourselves the capacity for acting and implementing upon that which we already know. At the heart of this, brothers and sisters, is why do we worship Allah? Why do we worship Allah? We do not worship Allah for this rush of emotion and this rush of feeling that may or may not come. Because you have an obligation to worship Allah, even if you're not quite in the mood, absolutely. You worship Allah for more than a transient feeling that you might get sometimes and not get other times. We worship Allah because Allah is deserving of our worship. And if the only reason that you worship Allah is so that you get that rush, and when you don't get that rush, you think to yourself, what is the point? What is the reason for this? So that's why it becomes necessary for us to ground our faith in something very robust, in a relationship with Allah that extends beyond these transitory feelings. We worship Allah for more than a feeling. If you feel that rush of iman, it's good, it's beautiful, but it should not form a dependency such that when it's absent, that we feel as though we can no longer worship Allah. And being a believer is sticking to it, is showing up, even when it feels difficult to just show up. It is following through on the commandments of Allah when you go through difficulty. Because consistency is a sign of sincerity. The Prophet ﷺ was asked by one of his companions, tell me something that I can ask of no one else but you. What is one piece of advice that only you are capable of giving me? You would think maybe the Prophet ﷺ is going to give this grand answer, something you wouldn't expect. He says, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. Says, say, I have believed in Allah. And then upon that claim, be steadfast. Be steadfast upon your claim of having faith. Easier said than done. But this is the heart of the matter, to have steadfast. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, aminu. O you who have believed, believe. Continue to believe. Constantly revive your faith. Constantly reinforce your faith. Because this is the most precious commodity that you have, this faith of yours. If you are checking an investment every day, there is no more valuable investment that you have. That if you are to go red on it, then you've lost it all. And that is your iman. So I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla that He gives us firm iman, that He gives us firm faith, that is rooted on a solid, robust foundation, that is rooted in a strong relationship with Him, a faith that does not waver when the winds come by, a faith that continues to increase day in and day out. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم على عبدك ورسولك محمد اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين. For our sick brothers and sisters, we have our brother Akram Zakir, his brother Khutbah's father, and he is in the ICU in UMass with head injuries. We ask Allah that He gives him a quick and full recovery. We ask Allah that He have mercy upon all of our deceased. We ask Allah that He shows us what is true as true and enables us to follow it. And we ask Allah to show us what is false as false and enables us to stay away from it. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. واذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون.
الله أكبر ولا إله إلا الله